Penguin Random House Audio presents The Cloister. This is the author, James Carroll. Beloved, let us love one another, for love is of God, and every one that loveth is born of God and knoweth God. 1 John chapter 4, verse 7. Author's Note. Quotations from Abelard's The History of My Calamities and from the letters of Abelard and Héloïse are from the classic 17th century rendition by the French Enlightenment figure Peter Abelard, Letters of Abelard and Héloïse, which appeared in an English translation by John Hughes in 1782. Other quotations are from The Lost Love Letters of Abelard and Héloïse, edited and translated by Constant J. Muse, from Peter Abelard's Collationes, edited and translated by John Maranbon and Giovanni Orlandi, and from a letter of Bernard of Clairvaux to Pope Innocent II, translated by Bruno Scott James. In these citations I have taken some minor editorial liberties for clarity and style. Biblical quotations are from the King James Version or, to reflect mid-20th century Catholic usage, the Douay Rheims Bible. The anathemas from the 12th century Council of Sens are from Heinrich Denziger and Quiridion Decrees of the Solemn Magisterium. Prologue. In the Duchy of Bourgogne, in the year 1142, the largest church in Christendom stood on a hill above the tidy village of Cluny. That church, with its towering belfry, Corinthian columns, and massive rectangular pilasters, defined the pulse of the Benedictine Abbey of Cluny, a large walled complex itself the center of a vast monastic empire, counting 10,000 monks and nuns in foundations spread across the continent from the Mediterranean to the British Isles. The sharply pointed Cluny belfry was visible for miles around and had served across the last phase of a long journey as the locating focal point for the small band of horsemen that approached now, making its way up the final slope toward the monastery gate. The palfrey on which a heavily cloaked rider sat, as it slowly ascended the hill, was a lighter weight horse, and its unsteady gait suggested what a distance it had come. Trailing behind were 4 other ridden horses, and a hitched pair pulling a covered cart. The wind was howling from the valley spread below, and the sun was low at the distant ridge. The stout wooden gate banged open. The porter rushed out, going to the first horse, to take its headstall and stirrup. In a bustle of activity, others of the minor orders followed from within the monastic enclosure, the almoner, oblates, and lay brothers. A knot of black robes, they surrounded the riders and the cart. With the porter's help, the first rider dismounted, throwing aside the covering woolen mantle, and being seen only then, for the religious woman she was. The porter bowed, showing his tonsure, muttering, "My lady." 2 others in the party were religious sisters, clothed, like the first, in a long, gray, belted tunic, scapular, white coif, and veil. Except that the fabric was the gray of rough, undyed wool, the garb was the habit of the Benedictine order. They were nuns. The party's 6 accompanying men were the horsemaster, the marshal, 2 armed henchmen, and 2 stewards. As the first nun, walking erect and at an authoritative clip, led the way through the gate, the receiving monks bowed, even while stealing glances at her sharply concentrated face. With whispers, they had spoken of this arrival, although this woman of slight stature and medium height did not match the measure of the songs sung in her name. She was the Abbess Héloïse, Mother Superior of the Abbey of the Paraclete, a ranking convent several days' journey by river and rough trail to the north. In those whispers, they had spoken of what she would be coming for. There would be further songs. The porter had been instructed to show her at once into the main cloister garden, to which women were ordinarily forbidden entrance, but the instruction had come from the abbot primate himself. At this time of year, the garden was still bare of fruit and berries, but twigs shone with the fresh scales of buds and shoots. The waters of the central fountain, drawing on the stream that ran below the monastic kitchens and toilet block, had quickened in recent weeks, but would not splash again until the coming spring rains replenished the flow. The normally bright marble of the arches and pillars of the surrounding arcade was dusky gray now, for the shadows of evening had settled on the place like loneliness. The vespers bell would be ringing soon. The porter gestured at a garden bench, but did not wait to see if Mother Héloïse would sit. She watched him hurry away, as relieved to be alone as, after the day's ride, she was to be standing. It was not long before the abbot primate entered, coming from the chapel. Because his cowl was up, his face was shadowed. Across his chest was the leather strap of a pilgrim's satchel, hanging at his side. The unfettered stride with which he crossed to her suggested the depth of feeling she knew was there. His arms were stretched toward her, but as he drew close, she genuflected, a proper obeisance. With her head bowed, she reached for his hand, pulled it to her mouth, and kissed his ring. Grasping her upper arms, he lifted her. He lowered his cowl, unveiling sadness. "Where is he, Most Holy Father?" she asked. The abbot primate turned slightly, gesture enough to indicate the chapter house, the darkened room, close at hand, separated from the garden by a large arcaded gate of 3 stout arches, each one upheld by a clutch of fluted pillars. Mother Héloïse peered into the room. Under the interlacing of groined ceiling vaults, the open space was large enough to accommodate the professed members of the monastic family, with each monk sitting at the wall on the stone bench that defined 3 sides of the rectangle. Now the room was vacant, but as her eyes adjusted, she made out the dark form of the catafalque standing in the center. She should have sought the abbot primate's sleeve to move away from him, but did not. Instead, she simply walked out of the garden, crossing through the arcade to enter the chapter house, going directly to the one for whom she'd come. Leaves of lavender and woodruff and dried rose petals were scattered on the floor. Pots of rose water stood at the 4 corners of the bier, but still the fetid odor of his decomposition came to her. He was clothed in his black habit, and his hands were hidden under the folds of his scapular. But the sight of his sharp-featured face, with its distinctive brow and aquiline nose, made her stop. Oh, Peter. Lifeless, yes, but also old. He had come into his 7th decade, yet she still thought of him as they had been before. The lids of his eyes were down, but his lips were slightly parted, the lips from which the most precious words had pierced her, the lips with which her own had been so sweetly caressed. His lips. She bent to them, touched them lightly with her cheek, then put her mouth on his. Oh, my Peter. The abbot primate took up a place behind her. To her back, he said quietly, "When I sent for you, I assumed he would still be alive at your arrival. I am sorry." He waited. When finally she turned to him, she said, "They condemned him because of me." Her voice was shot through with feeling, a mix of grief and anger. "Because I refused to renounce my love, because he remained mine through all
Sample complete. Ready to continue?